I'm 38 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've considered this house my sanctuary, a place of peace, of partnership, of shared dreams. But as I stand here today looking at the absolute state of what was once our master bathroom, I can tell you that a sanctuary can become a battlefield with shocking speed. And the first shot in this particular war wasn't fired with a gun. It was fired with a flush, or rather a lack of cleaning after the flush, for 4 straight weeks. To understand how we got here, how a simple piece of porcelain became a symbol of a fundamental breakdown, you have to go back. Not 4 weeks when the standoff began, but 5 years to the day my husband Mark and I first walked through the front door of this house. We were renters for years, living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment with a single tiny bathroom that was the source of more low-grade simmering tension than anything else in our lives. I'm a person who thrives on order. Not in an obsessive way, but I believe a clean space leads to a clear mind. A tidy home is a happy home. Mark is 40 years old and he operates on a different frequency. He's brilliant, he's funny, he's the love of my life, but his definition of clean is what I would call things are no longer actively sticking to the floor. He doesn't see the dust bunnies gathering in the corner, and he doesn't notice the toothpaste splatter on the mirror until it's fossilized. In our old apartment, that tiny bathroom was a constant silent argument. I'd clean it. It would be pristine for about 12 hours, and then the slow, inevitable slide back into his comfortable level of chaos would begin. It was exhausting. So when we finally saved up enough to buy a house, our list of non-negotiables was short, but it was firm. A decent kitchen, a small yard for a future dog, and at the very top of that list, highlighted and underlined 3 times, were 2 words, 2 bathrooms. It wasn't about luxury, it was about survival. It was our marital peace treaty written in tile and grout. We saw a dozen places. Some were charming, but had that dreaded single bathroom. Others had 2, but one was a dingy half-bath tucked into a basement corner that felt like the set of a horror movie. We were starting to get discouraged. And then we found this one. A modest single-family home, but the moment we walked in, we knew. When the realtor showed us the master bedroom with its own ensuite bathroom and then led us down the hall to a second full-sized guest bathroom, Mark and I just looked at each other. It was a silent, perfect moment of understanding. This was it. This was the place where the toothpaste wars would end. The existence of 2 full bathrooms wasn't just a feature for us. It was the foundation upon which we were going to build our future. It was a promise of personal space, of an end to the morning traffic jams of a world where one person's relaxed standards of hygiene didn't have to infringe on the other's desire for order. We bought the house. I was 33. Mark was 35, and we were ecstatic. The first night, before any of our furniture had arrived, we sat on the floor of the empty living room eating pizza out of the box and drinking cheap champagne from paper cups. And right there, amidst the echoes and the smell of fresh paint, we made a pact. We divided the chores based on what we each hated the least. Mark took on the yard work, mowing, weeding, all of it. He genuinely enjoyed being outside, so that was a win for him. I took on the kitchen. I love to cook, and I find cleaning up as I go to be almost meditative. It was a natural fit. We agreed to share things like vacuuming and dusting, and then we came to the bathrooms. We'll alternate, I'd said, taking a sip of champagne. You take them 1 week, I'll take them the next. Both of them, top to bottom. Toilets, showers, sinks, floors, the whole deal. That way it's always fair. Mark agreed instantly. He sealed it with a handshake that turned into a hug. It felt so simple, so adult. We had a system. We had solved the single greatest source of friction in our relationship. For 5 years, that system worked. It was the bedrock of our domestic harmony. On my week, I'd put on my cleaning playlist and make both bathrooms sparkle. On his week, he'd do the same. His version of sparkle was a little less sparkly than mine, but he held up his end of the bargain. The toilets were scrubbed, the sinks were wiped. The peace was kept. The house became our home. We painted the walls, we bought furniture, we hosted holidays. That guest bathroom became a point of pride for me. always spotless and ready for company. The master bathroom was our shared space, and thanks to our agreement, it remained a place of calm, not conflict. We had done it. We had cracked the code. Looking back now, I suppose the signs were their small hairline fractures in the foundation of our agreement. Over the years, Mark's cleaning weeks became a little less thorough. The top-to-bottom clean sometimes became a wipe and a prayer. A quick swish of the toilet brush instead of a proper scrub. He'd forget to do the mirrors or the floor. I'd gently remind him, or more often, I'd just quietly go in after him and finish the job myself, telling myself it wasn't worth the argument. I was picking up the slack, but I reasoned that all relationships have a little give and take. What I failed to realize was that my quiet corrections weren't teaching him anything. They were enabling him. He wasn't seeing my extra work as a kindness. He was seeing it as the new standard. My baseline of clean was an optional extra, and his baseline of good enough was the official requirement. He was still technically cleaning the bathroom, so in his mind he was holding up his end of the deal. He didn't see the extra hour I spent every other week bringing his work up to par. He just saw a clean bathroom and figured his 30 minutes of effort had done the trick. I chose peace over confrontation, and in doing so, I accidentally redrew the lines of our agreement without his consent or even his knowledge. The shared responsibility had slowly and perceptibly become mostly my responsibility, and that I now realize was a mistake. Because when you let a standard slip an inch, it will eventually slip a mile. The final straw came 4 weeks ago. It arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, dismissive wave of the hand. It was a Saturday morning. My cleaning week had just ended, and I had spent the previous evening making sure the house was in order. The kitchen floors were mopped, the living room was dusted, and our pristine guest bathroom was practically gleaming under the lights. I had done my half of the shared chores, plus a little extra as usual. It was now Mark's week, his responsibility, and the first most obvious task on the list was the master bathroom toilet. It wasn't a disaster zone yet, but it was well on its way. It was clear it hadn't been so much as swished with a brush in nearly 2 weeks. There was that telltale ring forming at the waterline, a faint but stubborn discoloration that I knew would only get worse. It was the kind of grime that takes 30 seconds to prevent but a solid 5 minutes of hard scrubbing, to remove once it sets in. I had seen this movie before. I knew that if I didn't say something now, I would be the one on my hands and knees with a bottle of bleach, in 2 weeks scrubbing away his neglect while he was out enjoying the yard. I found him in the living room scrolling on his phone, a cup of coffee steaming on the coaster beside him. The morning light was pouring through the windows, and it felt like a perfectly normal, peaceful Saturday. I hated to break the calm, but I hated the alternative even more. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light and casual. "Morning. When you get a chance today, could you make sure you give the toilet in our bathroom a really good scrub? It's starting to get a little rough in there." Mark didn't look up from his phone. He just grunted in a way that was meant to be an acknowledgement. I waited. A few seconds passed. He kept scrolling, a faint smile on his face as he watched some video. "Mark," I said a little more firmly this time, "I'm serious. It needs to be done today." This time, he did look up, and the look in his eyes was one of pure annoyance. It was the look of a man being bothered with trivialities. Yeah, I heard you. I'll get to it." Today, though, I pressed. "It's your week, and that's the first thing on the list." He let out an exaggerated sigh and tossed his phone onto the couch cushion beside him. He finally gave me his full attention, and it was not friendly. "Robert, for God's sake, it's a toilet. It's fine. I'll wipe it down later." "It needs more than a wipe down," I said, my own patience starting to fray. "It needs to be scrubbed, properly, like we agreed." And that's when he said it. The words that changed everything. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest in a posture of complete defiance. "No," he said, his voice flat and final. "I'm not doing it. It doesn't bother me, so I'm not scrubbing it. If it bothers you that much, you can do it." I just stood there speechless. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and heavy. It was so much more than just a refusal to do a chore. It was a declaration. In that single selfish sentence, he had taken our 5-year agreement, the very bedrock of our domestic partnership, and shattered it on the floor. He wasn't just saying no to cleaning the toilet. He was saying that his comfort was more important than our agreement. He was saying that my standards were my problem, not our shared responsibility. And he was saying that the work I did week in and week out to maintain our home was invisible to him, and that the work he was supposed to do was an option, not an obligation. For 5 years, I had quietly corrected his half-hearted efforts. I had scrubbed the rings he ignored, wiped the counters he missed, and cleaned the floors he forgot. I did it to keep the peace, to avoid this very confrontation. And what had it gotten me? Not gratitude, not respect, but entitlement. He had become so accustomed to me picking up his slack that he now considered it my job. The verbal agreement we made on that first night in our empty house was officially terminated, not by discussion or mutual consent, but by his unilateral decree. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, didn't just break. It vaporized. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity that I had never felt before. I saw the path forward with perfect precision. Arguing would be useless. He had already made his position clear. Pleading would be pathetic. I wasn't going to beg my own husband to honor a promise he had made to me. Giving in and cleaning it myself was unthinkable. That would set a new precedent, one where his refusal was a winning strategy. If I cleaned that toilet now, I would be cleaning it forever. So I did none of those things. I looked at him sitting there on the couch, smug and defiant, completely unaware of the monumental shift that had just occurred. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I didn't even sigh. I just nodded a single, slow, deliberate nod. "Okay," I said. My voice was unnervingly calm, even to my own ears. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't grab the toilet brush. I walked straight down the hall, past the living room, past the guest bathroom, and into our master bedroom. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I felt a strange sense of purpose, of grim determination. He wanted to redraw the lines of our partnership. Fine. I would draw a new one myself, a line he couldn't cross. I walked into the master bathroom, his bathroom, I thought, and I began to move. I opened the medicine cabinet, I took out my toothbrush and my toothpaste. I grabbed my face wash, my moisturizer, and the expensive serum I only used at night. I went to the shower and gathered my shampoo, my conditioner, and my body wash. I took my razor from its stand and my shaving cream from the shelf. I gathered every single item that was exclusively mine, every bottle, tube, and container that I used to care for myself. My deodorant from the counter, my contact lens case and solution. The pile in my arms grew until I could barely see over it. I walked out of the master bathroom, leaving behind only the things we shared, hand soap towels and his own personal items. I walked across the hall to the guest bathroom, my sanctuary. The room was spotless, just as I'd left it the night before. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The counter was a clean, empty expanse of white quartz. And with methodical precision, I began to set up my new life. I placed my toothbrush in the clean, empty holder. I arranged my skincare products next to the sink, lining them up in the order I used them. I put my shampoo and conditioner on the corner shelf in the pristine shower. I slid my razor into a slot in the shower caddy. Each placement was a deliberate act, a nail in the coffin of our old agreement. I wasn't just moving my toiletries. I was moving my entire existence out of a shared space that was no longer truly shared. I was performing a quiet domestic secession. When I was done, I looked at my reflection in the perfectly clean, streak-free mirror. I looked tired, but resolute. I took a deep breath. From this moment forward, this was my bathroom, mine to use and mine to maintain. I would keep it immaculate, a shining testament to my side of the bargain. And the master bathroom, the one down the hall with the slowly festering toilet, that was no longer my concern. It was no longer our bathroom. It was Mark's. By refusing the responsibility, he had unknowingly claimed sole ownership. He wanted to live by his standards. He could have at it. He wanted to ignore the grime. He was welcome to it. But I would not be a party to it. I would not use it. I would not look at it, and I most certainly would not clean it. I had severed my connection to that room entirely. He had refused a 30-second task, and in doing so, he had gifted me my own private, pristine bathroom and burdened himself with a space that would now degrade according to his own neglectful timeline. I walked out of my new bathroom, closing the door softly behind me. I went to the linen closet and took out a fresh set of bath towels, the nice ones we usually save for guests, and carried them back into my bathroom. I hung one by the shower and folded the other neatly on the rack. My final act of claiming my new territory. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. Mark was still in the living room, still on his phone, probably assuming I was off in a huff, and would eventually come back to clean the toilet just like I always did. He had no idea that I hadn't just walked out of the room, I had walked out of our agreement. The standoff had begun. He just didn't know it yet. He thought he had won a small battle over a household chore. He had no idea he had just lost the war. The first few days were silent, eerily so. I went about my routine using my new private bathroom, and it felt like a luxury vacation. Everything was exactly where I left it. The counter was free of his beard trimmings. The mirror was spotless. The shower was dry and clean. It was a small slice of absolute order in a world that had felt increasingly chaotic. I half expected Mark to notice immediately to ask why my things were gone from the master bath, but he didn't. He was so wrapped up in his phone, his shows, his own world, that the geography of our home had shifted under his feet, and he hadn't felt a thing. By the end of the first week, the silence started to feel less like peace and more like the quiet hum before a storm. I was cleaning my bathroom, my pristine sanctuary, wiping down the quartz countertop, and polishing the chrome faucet until it gleamed. Mark walked past the open door, stopped, and leaned against the frame. "What are you doing?" he asked, a slight edge to his voice. "Cleaning the bathroom?" I said, simply, not looking up. He was quiet for a moment. "You missed a spot. In the other one." I stopped polishing and stood up straight, meeting his eyes in the reflection of the mirror. "No," I said, my voice even and calm. "I didn't." I turned back to my work, and he stood there for another 10 seconds before walking away without another word. He knew. He must have known. He just wasn't ready to admit what was happening. That night, I caught a glimpse into the master bathroom as I walked by. A faint yellowish ring was beginning to form at the waterline of the toilet bowl, the first sign of decay, the first bloom in his personal petri dish. Week 2 was when the standoff became palpable. The house which we had bought together 5 years earlier began to feel partitioned, like a city with a wall running through it. My side was clean, orderly, and smelled faintly of lavender and lemon. His side was starting to develop its own unique atmosphere. A subtle, unpleasant odor began to waft from the master bathroom whenever the door was opened. It was the kind of smell you try to ignore, telling yourself it's just in your head until you can't anymore. Mark became passive-aggressive. He'd make comments about how the whole house felt stuffy, or ask if something had gone bad in the kitchen trash when we both knew the source was down the hall. He was testing me, baiting me, trying to see if I would crack and just go clean it to make the problem go away. But I was a statue. My resolve, which had been born of frustration, was now forged in principle. I had my clean space. I had my peace. I would not surrender it. One evening, he cornered me in the kitchen. "You know this is ridiculous, Robert." He said, his arms crossed. He was 40 years old, a grown man, and he was talking like a teenager. "What's ridiculous, Mark?" I asked, continuing to load the dishwasher. This whole thing, you're acting weird. You're hiding in the guest room. It's like you don't live here anymore." I closed the dishwasher and turned to face him fully. "I'm not hiding. I'm just using the other bathroom." "Why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Because it's clean," I said. It was the simplest, most honest answer in the world. The words hung in the air between us, an accusation he couldn't refute. He stared at me, his jaw working, but he had no comeback. Because the truth was, his bathroom wasn't clean, and it was his fault. He turned and stormed off, and the argument was over. He had tried to make it about my behavior, about me being weird. But I had calmly and deliberately placed the focus right back where it belonged, on the toilet. By week 3, the master bathroom had become a no-go zone. The smell was no longer subtle. It was an entity. It clung to the hallway. I found myself holding my breath when I walked past the door. I caught a glimpse inside once when he left the door ajar, and I almost gagged. The ring in the bowl was no longer a faint yellow line. It was a thick brown crusty band with tributary streaks running down the porcelain. The entire area was a disaster zone. It was a monument to his stubbornness. Meanwhile, my bathroom remained an oasis. I'd light a candle in there sometimes while I showered. I kept a small plant on the windowsill. It was my territory, and I defended its borders with cleaning spray and a microfiber cloth. The contrast was so stark, so absolute. It wasn't about a clean bathroom versus a dirty one anymore. It was about two different philosophies of life separated by a hallway. It was order versus chaos, responsibility versus neglect. The end came on day 28, 4 full weeks after his refusal. I was in the living room reading a book when Mark came stomping down the hall. His face was a mask of fury and disgust. This was it. "Robert," he seethed, his voice trembling with rage. "You need to come look at this. It's a health hazard. The master bathroom is disgusting." I slowly placed my bookmark in my novel and set it down. I looked up at him, my expression unreadable. "Oh," I said. "Yes, oh," he mocked. "It's beyond filthy. I don't understand how you could let it get this bad. It's your turn to clean it." I stood up slowly. My heart was pounding, but on the outside, I was perfectly calm. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment the consequences of his own actions would come home to roost. "Okay," I said. "Let's talk about this." I didn't walk toward the master bathroom. Instead, I walked toward my bathroom. I opened the door and gestured for him to enter. He looked confused, but followed me in. The room was immaculate. The air smelled fresh. The single towel hanging on the rack was perfectly folded. The chrome shone under the lights. The toilet was pristine. "This," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "is the bathroom I use. I have used it exclusively for the last 28 days. As you can see, it is spotless. I clean it every few days because I believe in maintaining the spaces I inhabit." He stared around the room, then back at me, his anger being replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. I continued. "4 weeks ago, Mark, on a Tuesday, I asked you to clean the toilet in the master bathroom. You told me, and I quote, 'No, I'm not doing it.' You unilaterally terminated our shared agreement for that space. I respected your decision. I immediately ceased using that bathroom, and I moved all of my things in here. I have not set foot in there since that day." I let the words sink in. He looked from my pristine toilet to my face, the logic of the situation crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He had no argument. He had no defense. "The state of that bathroom," I said, "delivering the final blow, has absolutely nothing to do with me. Every single bit of that biocontaminant down the hall, is yours. You created it, you cultivated it, and you own it. By refusing the responsibility, you claimed sole ownership of the consequences. So no, it's not my turn to clean it. I cleaned my bathroom this morning." He was speechless. The fury drained out of him, replaced by the weary, sickened look of total defeat. He knew I was right. There was no loophole, no excuse he could possibly make. He had drawn a line in the sand over a simple chore, and I had simply stepped over it and walked away, leaving him alone on his side with the mess he was so determined to ignore. He looked down at the floor, then back at me. "So what now?" he whispered. "Now," I said, stepping out of my perfect bathroom, "you go and get the bleach. I suggest you wear gloves." I walked back to the living room, picked up my book, and sat down. A few minutes later, I heard the sounds. The reluctant opening of the cabinet under the kitchen sink, the snap of rubber gloves, the long, slow, defeated footsteps of a man walking toward a battle he had already lost. Then I heard the distinct sound of a toilet brush scrubbing porcelain with a frantic, desperate energy. It was the sound of surrender, the sound of a lesson being learned the hard way. He never mentioned it again. But from that day forward, the house remained partitioned. The guest bathroom is my bathroom. The master bathroom is his. He keeps it clean now, surprisingly so. He learned that the effort of a 30-second wipe down is nothing compared to the monumental task of reclaiming a space from the brink of oblivion. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because I needed to prove a point. Our home is a partnership, and a partnership requires equal effort. He wanted to see what would happen if he just stopped trying. Well, he found out. I won myself a permanently clean private space. But more than that, I redrew a boundary that he had tried to erase, and I built it out of tile porcelain and his own stubborn pride.